Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to join another weekly cultural storytelling from different parts of the world. This is our weekly gathering from everywhere to share stories about travel, food, history, objects, lifestyle, and inspiring people stories. Today, I have Mike joining from our flat in London to talk about photographic time travel. So I'm gonna spotlight Mike to join us. Hello, Mike.
Hello, Angie. From not so far away.
We're just next door to each other. So for those who haven't met you before, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us the story you're gonna tell today?
Okay, so I'm Mike Sharples, and what's most important for what I'm going to say is that I've spent quite a bit of time in Edinburgh. So I wasn't born in Edinburgh. I was born just south of Manchester, and at the age of 10, my parents moved me up to the frozen wastes that are the mid of Scotland, to Edinburgh, to Fairmile Head on the north of Edinburgh. And it started a love-hate relationship with Edinburgh, which gradually grew from hatred of being the only English boy in my class to love for the culture and the traditions and the city of Edinburgh. So that's enough about me. Let me start by sharing the screen and share sound, optimize the video clip, and share. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, and okay, good, and you can still hear me. Good. Edinburgh. So Edinburgh is a beautiful city, and I hope that at some time, if you haven't been to Edinburgh, how many of you have been to Edinburgh actually? Can you just put in the chat if you have, or hold up your hands, just say whether you've been to Edinburgh and visited often. Yeah. So Edinburgh is a beautiful city. It's got a medieval city centre and a castle in the very centre on an old volcanic hill in the centre of the city that's 1,000 years old and is still inhabited, still used. And that's a view of Edinburgh. Edinburgh is also a city of stories. Do any of you know any famous storytellers who've lived in Edinburgh or who've worked in Edinburgh? Just put in the chat box if you know of any famous storytellers from Edinburgh. Harry Potter. Well, Harry Potter didn't actually live in Edinburgh. Harry Potter is a fictional character. But you're right that the author of Harry Potter, J.K. Rowling, lived and worked in Edinburgh. And on the right, you can see one of the cafes where she worked, which has now been rebranded as the birthplace of Harry Potter. She's a little bit annoyed about that because the birthplace certainly wasn't in that cafe. She had been thinking about the books for many years beforehand. And interestingly, the cafe burnt down a few months ago. It's not clear whether it was angry fans of J.K. Rowling who burnt it down, but it did burn down. But fortunately, the table where she wrote is still being preserved. It was miraculously preserved in the middle of this burning cafe. So J.K. Rowling, some others, yes, you're mentioning Ian Rankin, Robert Louis Stevenson, Adam Smith. So here are just a few. Muriel Spark, who wrote The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, and it's been made into a film with starring Maggie Smith, and there's a connection to J.K. Rowling because she also starred in the Harry Potter movies. According to my sister, who lived with me in Edinburgh, my sister auditioned for the film of Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, but then decided that she wanted to go away on holiday rather than take part in the film. So that's a story. I'm not sure whether I believe her. Train Spotting, also made into a great movie. Kate Atkinson, One Good Turn, Jackson Brodie novels, Ian Rankin, a whole series of novels, and the granddaddy of them all, Sir Walter Scott, whose probably his best novel was set in Edinburgh, called The Heart of Midlothian, written in 1818. And Robert Burns, yes, of course, Mark, not to forget Robert Burns, who lived in Edinburgh. So I want to take you back not to the time of Robert Burns, but to 1981. In 1981, I was a student, a postgraduate student at the University of Edinburgh, trying to study for a PhD in artificial intelligence. Now, how many of you know the word drich? It's a good old Scottish word. Just a little challenge for you. I'd like you to try and pronounce the word drich. So you've got go on, Mark, you say it again.
Drich.
Drich. So it's got to have a rolling R and it's got to end in. Anybody else want to try pronouncing drich?
Come on, Liam.
Try, Minji.
Drich.
Not quite. It's not drich. Drich.
Drich.
Liam, you have a go.
Drich.
Drich.
Yay.
Hey, it's a good Edinburgh accent.
Drich.
So, and do you know what it means? So the word drich, it means cold, wet, miserable. And it's a great word that describes Edinburgh from about October till March. It is drich. And as a student there, I was living in a student flat with no heating. And I think, as I remember, no hot water either. So I was cold and wet and miserable. And so I was also interested in photography. And so I joined the Edinburgh Photographic Society. Now, the Edinburgh Photographic Society has a wonderful Georgian building in the centre of Edinburgh. That's the hallway to it. And as a member of the Edinburgh Photographic Society, I got a key to that door. So I could go in at any time of the day and night. And the great thing about it was, not only did it have a wonderful darkroom in the basement, but it also had a lounge. And in the lounge, there was a fire. And so I would let myself in to the Edinburgh Photographic Society building at 11 o'clock at night when nobody else was there, and sit in front of the fire and read books, do research, and occasionally fall asleep. But one day, I decided I would rummage around because there were lots of drawers and filing cabinets there. And being a curious student, I decided I would look around, pulled open one of those drawers and found this. It was what looked like a sheet of writing paper. And on that writing paper, there was a faint negative image. So being curious, I took that piece of writing paper out, took it downstairs into the basement, put it under an enlarger with photographic paper, and this is what I saw. Let me just stop the sharing. That's what I saw. Can you all see it? That was the actual photograph that I printed. So it looked like a woman in a fancy dress costume with a basket. And I was curious. So I'll start sharing again. Let me just start sharing my screen again.
Mike, you're sharing your screensaver.
You can't see it, can you?
We can't see your PowerPoint.
Okay, let me just try once more. Okay, there we go. Can you see it now? Let's just see a black screen. You can see it?
Yes.
You can see it now. Okay. So that's a copy of that same photograph, but it's in the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. It's one of the most famous photographs from the 19th century. And I was holding the actual negative of that photograph. Fortunately, being a good student, I didn't run out with it. I very carefully put it back into that drawer. But it intrigued me. Who was that woman? What was she doing? Well, it turned out that the woman was called Mrs. Flucker, and she was shucking oysters. It's very difficult to say Mrs. Flucker shucking oysters. Shucking means taking the nasty bits out of, taking the central bit out of the oyster. So taking the edible part out of the oyster. And the photograph was taken in 1845 by two pioneer photographers, David Octavius Hill and Robert Adamson. So I was curious to know more about Hill and Adamson. So let me take you back now to 1843. In 1843, David Octavius Hill was an aspiring artist, portrait artist. This is a portrait of David Octavius Hill, and he was moderately successful. But then, in 1843, came along a great opportunity, the Great Disruption. The Great Disruption was when 425 evangelical ministers broke away from the established Church of Scotland to form the Free Church of Scotland. And it was a big event in Scottish history. But it was also an opportunity for David Octavius Hill because 425 worthies of the Church of Scotland would all be gathering in Edinburgh. And he decided he wanted to paint a gigantic picture of that disruption of all 425 ministers of the Church of Scotland, and portraits of each one of them, in which he could earn a lot of money from painting their portraits. But don't listen to me saying this. Let's hear it from David Octavius Hill himself.
The Great Disruption, they're calling it. At the General Assembly, all the ministers are leaving the established church to strike a blow for principle, to sign a deed of demission, to set up a new church.
But they're so dour, it won't be possible to get anyone interested.
Oh, that's where you're wrong. It's bound to make money. 425 ministers will all want an engraved copy, with more orders for all the supporters of the Free Church. It can't fail.
So that was David Octavius Hill. And he started off on his great project to do portraits of all of the ministers who came to that momentous event in 1843. And it's a composite picture of, on the left, David Octavius Hill, and on the right, a man called Robert Adamson. Now, David Octavius Hill ran into a problem, which was there were 425 people, but they were only there for a few days. And he started doing these drawings, sketch drawings, but he knew he wasn't going to get through them all in time. And then a friend of his, Brewster, man who invented the kaleidoscope, a scientist who was resident in Edinburgh, mentioned the new science of photography, and that there was a young practitioner called Robert Adamson. And he introduced David Octavius Hill to Robert Adamson. So this is a composite picture of the two of them, with David Octavius Hill on the left and the young Robert Adamson on the right. Robert Adamson was a kind of youthful geek who was into this new technology of photography. And they realized that here was a possibility to capture the likenesses of all of these ministers by sitting them down and taking their portraits. So they set up an outdoor studio in a place called Rock House in Edinburgh. Rock House is at the end of Princes Street, the main street of Edinburgh, and it's still there. You can still go, you can still see Rock House. And amazingly, inside the garden of Rock House are still some of the original props and the original artifacts from Hill and Adamson. So I'll just show you a little clip.
Thank you, gentlemen. How much longer to load the contraption?
I'm ready for the subjects to take their places.
Good. Now, this will not take very long. I can assure you, gentlemen, there's nothing to worry about. And if you could take your places, perhaps you could stand behind here, sir. And if you could take a seat. Now, let us see. I think maybe if you could have both hands on the cane, sir, and if you could hold the book. That's better. Yes, Robert?
That's fine.
Good. Now, gentlemen, if I can remind you to stay absolutely still while Mr. Adamson here operates the instrument.
Gentlemen.
So this was the start of the partnership between David Octavius Hill and Robert Adamson. And over the next few days, they photographed many more worthies, many more ministers from the Church of Scotland. And here are some of their actual photographs. They're a wonderful set of faces, characters. And there they are, pretending to huddle over a document. But then, and then it took another 25 years for David Octavius Hill to produce his master portrait. And that's it. That's his painted portrait based on those photographic images of the Great Disruption. It was eventually completed in 1866, and it still hangs in the Free Presbytery Hall in Edinburgh. I managed to see it when it was on display in the National Portrait Gallery in London. It's an amazing photograph, amazing painting. It all looks rather strange because each one of them, as you can see, is taken either from a sketch or from a photograph, and it looks like a kind of composite photograph of many, many faces. But that was his masterpiece from 1866. But the partnership didn't stop there. They decided that they would go off and take portraits of both famous people, but also ordinary working people. And they were the first photographers to take photographs of just ordinary working people, sometimes of upper-class women, of children. I think that's a lovely evocative photograph of a child looking rather annoyed at being photographed. Of sportsmen, tennis player there, and there of soldiers up in Edinburgh Castle. So now I want to take you forward in time to 1984. And in 1984, I'd just about finished my PhD at long last. And one of my friends, Alistair Scott, was a student at the National Film and Television School. At that point, it was called the National Film School. And for his graduation film, he decided he wanted to make an art film about Hill and Adamson. I'm still not sure to this day whether it was me who inspired him, but anyway, he decided to make a film about Robert Adamson. And as I was just finishing my PhD and had nothing much else to do, he asked me if I would be production manager on the film. Now, for those of you who don't know the movie business, production manager is the one who has to make it all happen, who has to find the locations, the actors, the costumes, and work with all of that side. So while Alistair and colleagues from National Film School were behind the camera, doing the lighting, the photography, the movie shots, setting up the shots, I was trying to make sure that everybody was in the right place and we're turning up on time with all the right costumes. Now, I'd never done anything like that before, so it was a bit of a challenge. The other challenge, just a minor one, was that we had no budget. So it was a film school film. And what happens with graduation films from the National Film School is that sometimes quite famous actors give up their time for free in the hope that the person who's behind the camera, the director, will one day be a famous movie director and will invite them back for a huge fee, or maybe just out of the kindness of their heart. So Alistair managed to get some quite well-known actors to take part. And I had to then set up the sets. So we had one glorious summer in Edinburgh in 1984, when for about 3 months, we tried to put together this recreation of 1840s Edinburgh and Hill and Adamson. So a question to you, Minji, do you want to put that up on the screen?
Yes, let me do that.
So there we are. I think you can see this as a poll. How would you make a movie about 19th century photographers with no budget? Would you raise funds from wealthy companies in Edinburgh? Would you ask people and organizations to lend their time, locations, and equipment for free? Or would you crowdfund it? Go on, let's see your answers.
Yes, so we're waiting for people to type in their answers, but Mark had a genius idea. He wants to combine all of them.
3 of them.
A plus 1
We're
plus
only allowed to have one answer. It might be all 3. I should have put a 4th one, all 3.
all 3. So we
So,
got
let's see your
50% people. We got 50% people participated. Should I wait for like a few more minutes for?
Just a few seconds. Okay. So Mark says 3. Okay. Okay, go on, let's see what you say. Okay, crowdfund. Most people said crowdfund. Oh, you have to remember this was 1984, and it was rather before the time of the internet, or at least the World Wide Web. It wasn't so easy to crowdfund for a movie, and also we only had 3 months. So trying to raise funds from hundreds or thousands of people to crowdfund it was not so easy. Raise funds from wealthy companies. Well, we tried, sitting on the phone, trying to get money from wealthy companies. But no, most of what we did was ask people and organizations to lend their time and locations and equipment. And amazingly, they did. People of Edinburgh are very generous. And we would knock on the door of a beautiful Georgian house and say, would you mind if we came in with all our equipment in a couple of weeks' time and film inside your house? And they said yes. And a lot of Edinburgh looks exactly as it did 150 years ago. Some of the locations like Edinburgh Castle, Greyfriars Churchyard, it really hasn't changed in 150 years. So we were quite fortunate. Another question. Let's go back here. Costumes. So we needed to have costumes for some of the principal players. So they're more generous in Glasgow. I think they probably are, yes. Costumes, so where do you get costumes from? Particularly authentic looking 19th century costumes like this. Well, have any of you seen the movie Mrs. Doubtfire? Any of you? Yeah? Some of you are nodding your head. Any of you wondered where the name Mrs. Doubtfire came from? Well, it came from a book by Anne Fine, written in 1987, called Madame Doubtfire. And Anne Fine is another author who lived in Edinburgh. And she found the name of Madame Doubtfire from a wonderful shop in Edinburgh called Madame Doubtfire. And Madame Doubtfire was a kind of emporium of clothing and bric-a-brac that was managed by the redoubtable Madame Doubtfire and her cats. And that was a photograph that must have been taken around about 1984. She didn't live much longer, unfortunately, and the shop no longer exists. But if we wanted to get costumes, then where else would you go to but Madame Doubtfire? So we went to look at the whiskers on that cat. I know, it's wonderful, isn't it? So we went to see the redoubtable Madame Doubtfire, and that's where we got many of our costumes from. She lent us them for free. So we had our costumes. Then we needed to get the locations. Well, as I said, some of the locations, such as Greyfriars Churchyard, and this is a photograph from Hill and Adamson, has never changed in 150 years. It still looks pretty much the same now as then. But there was one that was really important that we needed, which was New Haven. Now, New Haven is what at that time in the 1840s was a village very close to the port of Leith. And that's what it looked like. Another photograph from the redoubtable Hill and Adamson of women in New Haven, in a small street in New Haven. But unfortunately, in the 1980s, New Haven looked like this. So it was going to be rather difficult to convert New Haven from this to this. So we had a problem. And what did we do? Well, we searched around for other locations. Ross, Mark says, well, we found one that was pretty good as a simulation New Haven, which was Crail Harbour. And that's Crail Harbour. You can see some wonderful old buildings there. But there was just one slight problem. Can you notice what that one slight problem was?
The cars.
Yes, it was full of cars and modern boats. And so if we wanted to film in Crail, we had to do something. So here's another question to you. You want to put it up, Minji? So what would you do? Would you remove all the cars and boats from Crail Harbour? Would you use special effects to erase the cars and boats? Would you film so that the cars and boats aren't in shot, or something else? Go on, over to you. What would you do if you'd found the perfect location with just one slight problem of it being filled with modern cars and boats?
I would invite Harry Potter.
Harry Potter to wave his magic wand and say Expelliarmus.
Yes. Okay, we've got 50%.
As if we were filming in the 1980s, of course, yes. You've got to go back to my problem that I had in the 1980s.
I'm waiting for more people to vote. Come on, you don't need to be perfect. Have a go. What would you do if you were Mike in 1980s? Okay. Shall I end the poll and share the result?
Okay, let's see. Film so that the cars and boats aren't in shot, or use special effects. Well, it was a little bit difficult. I mean, we could have filmed so that the cars and boats aren't in shot, but we would have had to, if you see, film up the street like that, and we wouldn't have been able to get a shot of the harbour or the boat coming in. It would have been rather restricted. We would only been able to have a very narrow shot. So I chose number one, which was I went to the harbour master in Crail Harbour and said, would you mind removing all of those cars and boats? The harbour master said, yes, of course. And we gave him the day. And on that day, we came back to the harbour and all the cars and all the boats had magically disappeared. She had towed every one of those boats out into the sea and round the corner and anchored them and put up parking restrictions so that none of the cars could park there, all out of the kindness of his heart. And so in the film, we had a completely deserted Crail Harbour. So that was our next problem solved. Yes, wow.
You had your Harry Potter.
We had our Harry Potter Expelliarmus. Then we had an even bigger problem, which was the cast. Do I have a photo of it? Oh, I have more than a photo of it, as you'll see in a moment. then we had the problem of the cast. So as you remember, that's a photograph of a fishwife. A fishwife is a woman who collected the fish from the harbour, in that case, New Haven Harbour, maybe gutted the fish or removed the juicy bit from oysters, put them into that big basket that she then hoisted over her back and staggered up the hill, and it's quite a steep hill, into the centre of Edinburgh, and then sold those fish around the pubs and the streets of Edinburgh. And there are many fishwives. And so we wanted to get people who could act as fishwives, but also in authentic costumes. So we went to the obvious place, the Scottish Fisheries Museum in Anstruther, which was a wonderful place full of very kind people. But unfortunately, they only had one fishwife's costume on display. And they said, oh, that's the only one in the whole of Scotland. So we had a slight problem of how were we going to get both authentic fishwives and authentic fishwives costumes. So I had this idea of basically, in that case, crowdfunding or crowdsourcing. I put an advert in the local paper saying, we're looking for authentic fishwives costumes. And that got taken up by the local radio and the local press. And there was a campaign around Edinburgh to try and find genuine fishwives costumes. And amazingly, what we found was the descendants of those original fishwives, the great-great-great-granddaughters of the original fishwives, many of whom are still living in New Haven. And not only that, but in their attics, in the lofts of their houses, they still had their great-great-great-grandmother's fishwives costumes. And they were only too happy to wear them and to come out to Crail. And so on one magical day in August in 1984, we got about a dozen fishwives or descendants of fishwives dressed up in their ancestors' original costumes, loaded them all into a minibus and drove them off to Crail so that they could be extras in the movie. And so, and I'll show you, there you go, that's a photo I took of those wonderful old ladies dressed up as their great-great-great-grandmothers in those original costumes. So we had the location, we had the props, we also had a boat that was going to be crewed by members of staff of the Scottish Fishery Museum. We had the date, we had Crail cleared of cars. And so on that morning, we waited rather nervously to see whether the boat would actually appear around the corner of the bay and come into the harbour with authentic looking 19th century fishermen, whether we would be able to capture it all, whether the sun would shine because we only had one day, and whether everything would work according to plan. And so what I'm going to show you now is a clip from that film, and I want you to watch it, both just to enjoy it, but also from the perspective of a production manager, of all the things we had to do to make it happen, and all the people who very generously gave up their time and their effort to make it happen.
September the 10th, a photographic expedition to New Haven on the Firth of Forth.
camera is ready, so if you would lay down your knitting and stay perfectly still.
Can you look up here?
Oh, thank you, gentlemen. If you could strike your pose now. And remember, please, stay absolutely still for our camera. Thank you. Robert, is that set? Thank you.
New Haven became a favourite location for the photographers. They sought out all the villagers one by one as their subjects. Jenny Linton, New Haven fishwife. September 1846. The graveyard at Greyfriars. I watch as the photographers prepare their tableau.
Elizabeth, you're just in time. Robert.
Robert Adamson died in 1847. He had worked with Hill for only 3 years. Hill went back to the painting of the Free Church Ministers, which took another 25 years before it was finally completed. During the short partnership, they took many thousands of photographs. Calotypes, which first fixed our images of the past.
And that's it. So now back to 2021. And I have just wonderful memories of that summer in 1984 when we recreated the story of Hill and Adamson and met some just fabulous people who helped us make that memorable story. So that's it. Marcus, was that taken in the Camera Obscura? Yes, it was. In fact, I'm going to share my screen again, just very briefly. And share it, hold on. And if you want to watch the entire movie, then you can. It's there for free on vimeo.com. Minji, are you able to just put that into the chat box?
Right. So.
And you can see, and then the film starts in the Camera Obscura in Edinburgh, and it starts with the operator, played by an actor, introducing the Camera Obscura and a view of Edinburgh, and then that view of Edinburgh transforms into a view of Edinburgh in the 1840s, and the film ends again in the Camera Obscura. The Camera Obscura is another wonderful landmark in Edinburgh. It's at the top of the Royal Mile, and there's a tower just in front of the castle that you can walk up a winding staircase to get into this 19th century building that projects down onto a surface a large white concave table, a view of Edinburgh and the people moving in it. And at the time, in the mid-19th century, it must have seemed quite magical. You turned down the lights and you saw this, on this huge table, this moving image of the city around you. And it still works. It's still a tourist attraction. And I really recommend, if you go to Edinburgh, to go to the Camera Obscura, because you can just get that feeling of going back in time and going back in time to a moving image. So yes, it was filmed in the Camera Obscura in Edinburgh. I love that kind of history. Recalls to mind Edinburgh Museum series about photographer and painter E.A. Hornell, who was from Kirkcudbright. I watched the series. I didn't know that. I must watch it. Did you continue as a production manager for any other project? You're good at it. I think it was one of those things that it was a one-off, that I had, one magical summer to be able to do that. And I had 3 months to be able to do it. So no, I didn't continue as a production manager, but I'm very pleased to say that my daughter, Evelyn, has now gone into film production, and she's working on a movie set at this very moment as third assistant director. So it's in the family.
Did she mobilize the whole city to help her making the movie?
No. It's going to be a big blockbuster movie that she's working on, because at the moment, I don't know if you know, but Britain is becoming the new Hollywood, and there are many movies getting made in Britain and TV series for the streaming services. And so she's working on one of those. And all from finding that one negative all those years ago. Yes, and it was a genuine discovery. Just 11, as I said, 11 o'clock at night, opening this drawer. There are actually 2 negatives. I'll show you the other one that I found, which was that one. And that looks very strange, doesn't it? And what it was Hill and Adamson also held dressing up parties. So he got his friends to dress up. And this one was dressing up as a mad monk. And so he was filming this friend of his dressed as a monk. So those were the 2 negatives that I found. And as I say, I shone light through them, made copies of them, but then put them back very carefully into the box. So yes, all from finding one negative all those years ago. Are there any other questions or anything anybody wants to ask?
Well, can I just say, Mike, what a fantastic presentation. I thoroughly enjoyed that. That was really, really interesting.
Thank you, Mark.
Well, I'm just amazed at it. I mean, I'll talk to you privately, because I'd like you to do that presentation somewhere else, but I'll talk to you about that privately. But did you find that people were really willing to participate?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that was the amazing thing. When I started out, it was really daunting. But at that time, I was already fairly well connected in Edinburgh. But also, literally, I knocked on doors of some Regency and Georgian houses. And when the person answered, I said, we've heard that your house has got, authentic 19th century Victorian interior. Could we possibly film inside it? And people were just so friendly. I don't know whether it is that they, like being kind of associated with this aura of movie making, or just that they were genuinely kind, or they took pity on a poor down at heel student, because they all said yes. And I mean, the most amazing thing was the harbour master at Crail. And literally he said to me, "Oh, don't worry, I'll get rid of them." And on the day he had shifted all those boats.
When I was a student in Glasgow, we got the opportunity to film off the granary at the Clyde, and it was exactly the same. We didn't expect to get permission, and we simply asked, and they gave us permission to, and that was right up that. I mean, I don't know whether you know the granary that used to be there, but it was a huge multi-story building, and we were allowed to go onto the roof and film from it. Great fun.
Yeah, some years before, I did work as a another story, but I set up a community cable television station in Leith in Edinburgh. And for one of the programs that we made, there were 2 tower blocks in Leith, and we stood on the top of one tower block and filmed people on the top of the other tower block in Leith. So yeah, I think the moral of the story is
Oh, Mike.
Something that's really challenging and you don't know how to do it, it's always worth asking if you can get it for free.
This is something Mike and I are very good at, getting people's time for free.
That's what cultural storytelling is all about. Getting people to give up their time for free to tell a good story. And that's what I hope we did. And I do hope you will watch In Camera, because it's a well-made movie. Alistair Scott, by the way, went on to be a director mainly of TV. He set up a company called Lowman TV and made films mainly for Scottish television and BBC Scotland, and is now gone into academia as a lecturer in Napier University in Edinburgh, lecturer in film and media studies.
And this short film you made was on the Edinburgh Festival this year.
No, that wasn't the one. No, it's a different one.
Oh yeah, it's a different one. Yes.
So this film is put up on Vimeo so anybody can see it. But no, I don't know whether it's had a cinema showing. Don't think it has.
Thank you very much, Mike, for putting a really fabulous presentation. It's definitely one of our top 10, as Eva Jen said in the chat box. Next week, our talk was also related to Scotland. So what I'm going to do is I will spotlight the potential speakers next week, and Gary as well. I'll let you take over, Mark, Gary, at the end.
Okay, well, maybe I should let Liam introduce what's going to happen next week. Liam, do you want to say what we're going to do next week?
So is this just the youth?
Just describe what we're planning to do.
So is it the event with me and Neil speaking?
Yes.
Yeah, it's going to be me and Neil speaking, and I think there's someone else, isn't there, from America?
Yep.
Yeah. And we're going to be speaking about sort of just our experiences, things that we do, that we've done, and things that we do on a daily basis, just to sort of highlight sort of the cultural differences between three vastly different parts of the world. And I think that'll be a really insightful experience for everyone involved.
And as you can hear, Liam is more than capable of entertaining us for the hour, along with Neil and our colleague from America. So I'll be introducing it and kind of doing the technical things in the background, whilst Liam, Neil, and our colleague from America will be talking about their lives and as Liam says, exploring the similarities and differences, which I think will be absolutely fascinating. So I'm really looking forward to it, and I hope you're looking forward to it too.
Yes, so it's from Gary's suggestion to do a youth culture storytelling. We've got potentially 3 speakers. They are all teenagers, just a little bit younger than the rest of us, slightly. They live in different parts of the world, in Asia, in Europe, that's counting UK is still part of Europe, and America. So next week we will have our first culture exchange between 3 teenagers from different regions and continents of the world to do our first youth culture storytelling. So thank you very much, our next week's speaker. For today, I'm putting the link for a feedback session. If you attend the session, feel free to take 1 or 2 minutes to fill our feedback survey. Are you happy with the content, with the presentation format? What would you like to know more? All our talks are free, but if you would like to donate to support us continue, there's a link at the end of the survey so that you can make a donation if you like. So thank you very much. We will see you all next week. Thank you, Mike. Thanks, everyone. See you next week. Bye.